You're listening to the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast, creating community to foster joy and well-being. Thanks for listening.
Welcome to another session of Tell Me a Story with Ben Fraser. And today we are very delighted to have a guest with us, Michael Pawlukiewicz. I can't do it. You got it.
Pawlukiewicz.
All
Very
right.
Easy.
I'm going to learn that.
Don't freeze.
Pawlukiewicz.
Perfect. You got it.
Anyway, we're so glad that you have agreed to be with us and talk to us this afternoon. And I think we'll begin just first to give us a little context. Tell us who you are, what you've done, where were you born, just to give us a little view of who
a little
you
background. My name is Michael Pawlukiewicz. I was born in Brooklyn. I grew up in New York City, and was very. We've been going through how to pronounce Pawlukiewicz. I grew up in a Polish community, so I have strong Polish roots, although I don't speak the language. Nevertheless, grew up in New York and ended up, after school, I went to, I was thinking about going to college, and I wasn't really highly motivated back then. And I ended up going into the Coast Guard, where I spent 4 years. I told Roy in a previous episode of this thing that, it changed my life, and it was an important thing for me to do. And I was a sonarman. I became an oceanographic technician, and went all over the Pacific Ocean. Believe it or not, in the Coast Guard, I spent 4 years of my life in the middle of the ocean, nowhere near the coast. So that's the Coast Guard isn't just on the coast. But never the case. Moving along, after I got out of Coast Guard, I went to college, and luckily I had the GI Bill, so that helped me a lot. And I became a biologist.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to school in a little college called Southampton College on Long Island. It's part of Long Island University, and it had a really good marine program. That's why I went there. And interestingly, my wife Janet, that's where we met, and she also went there for the marine program. She wanted to be a marine scientist. We all both went to be marine scientists. And I hit the wall at chemistry, and she hit the wall at physics. So both of us decided to become biologists. And, that was closer to our hearts anyway. So we went to college, got a degree in biology, and then went on to University of Pennsylvania to study regional planning. The regional planning at the University of Pennsylvania was focused on environmental planning with nature. The professor was a man named Ian McHarg. A lot of people who are old in the environmental movement know Ian McHarg as the guy who wrote the book on designing with nature. And I graduated from that and I went to work on Long Island as I want to say an urban planner. Okay, I was working in urban planning because we were regional planning for the environment, and that was my specialty in that. And I went on from there, moved on to Washington, D.C. I worked at the Council of Governments in Washington, D.C. in the what was called the 208 program, which was water quality, trying to clean up the Potomac River, which at the time was incredibly dirty and smelly. And I like to think that I had a role in producing what is today the Potomac River, which is a beautiful river filled with fish and all. That we made a difference in that.
Sure.
And then went on through other jobs, working primarily in urban planning. I ended up with the Urban Land Institute, which was kind of a think tank, as the director of environmental. Not planning, but environmental director. That's what I was.
Okay.
And from there, and we worked with developers in bringing best practices for environmental protection into these people that were members of the Urban Land Institute were developers, finance people in development, finance designers, architects, who worked to design and produce communities.
Sure.
So it was exciting to do that. And then at the very end of my career, I was sent by the Urban Land Institute to Hong Kong, where I've lived for a couple of years working with people, because that's where all the action is in urban matters, in
Yes.
China and in Asia, basically.
Hong Kong's a beautiful city.
It is. That's too bad, though. was wonderful when we were there. It was just a wonderful place to live. We loved it. It was safe. It was delightful. Except we had one experience where we were in church. And it was like Christmas time, and we were in church. It's an Anglican church, and the priest says the prayers for the people. And the prayers for the people, pray for those in jail, pray for those who are sick, pray for those in power. Well, let's pray for those who were elected, those who were appointed, and those who were imposed. And we're sitting in church, we looked at each other, I guess we're in China. Anyway, so...
but at night, the lights and that sort of thing.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Fabulous food, too.
Yes.
Anyway, so then on the plane, coming back from Hong Kong, I retired and lived in the Northern Deck for a couple of years and came here. I've been living here for 8 years now.
Well, we're glad you're here. And one of the reasons that I asked you to come and speak today and have a conversation with me was because we were talking about birds. It just sort of came up. And you ended up knowing all kinds of things about birds. Yeah. And I know I had birds in my backyard because I put out a bird feeder, and squirrels came and rats and a lot of birds, but I didn't like the squirrels and rats, so I got rid of it. But you were talking about all the different kinds of birds all over the world, but also right here in this Hampton Roads area in Virginia Beach. So I wanted you first. What is a birder?
Okay. Now, I have to say, I really got involved with birding in Southampton when we were in college because we were taking ecology, courses like that.
Okay.
And getting out into nature and finding, and then you start, if you spend time out in nature and in the woods, all of a sudden you start to see birds that I grew up in New York City. So what? There's sparrows, pigeons, seagulls. Everybody has this notion that those are the birds that are out there. Oh, there's more pigeons, there's more sparrows. But if you get out into nature, even in Central Park, if you really go there and look, you'll find an incredibly interesting and beautiful birds. You and I were talking about woodpeckers, which are beautiful birds, and there are like 5 or 6 varieties right here in our community. But there are many, many others: warblers, vireos, flycatchers, thrushes that are in our community. But you have to go find them. You have to find them, and it takes time, it takes practice to see them, and you need binoculars. It's the best way to get to get on it. But anyway, that's kind of, I remember myself as a young person in New York and kind of just seeing birds.
So this came from an early time in your life, the interest in birds.
Well, yeah, when I was a young man.
Now, I have to confess something here, and I'm glad there's nothing sharp around because you won't hurt me. But my first part of my life had to do a whole lot with killing birds. We had chickens, and some of them weren't laying eggs, and so they were gone. But also, I had a little BB gun, and I would get the sparrows, and then later on, I would,
oh yes,
move to a shotgun, and there were pheasants and doves and all that kind of stuff. I don't have any desire to hunt or anything like that today. I love seeing birds. In fact, I think one of the things that you and I talked about is I saw a red-headed woodpecker while I was walking in First Landing State Park, not too far away from me.
Right, exactly.
Oh, it's a gorgeous bird. Before we go any further, I just want to say that Adrian Fisher has joined us here, because he has an interest in birds, and I thought I invited him to come, and he couldn't get here till now. But he'll ask some questions too, just because we're all interested in birds. Maybe tell us a story about a bird.
Okay. Well, when I started in Southampton, I was a student in biology and studying ecology. Ecology had just emerged as people only were just learning that word back in 1968, 69. But the thing about Southampton, this is Long Island, and now Long Island is a whale-shaped island, and they call it flukes at the back. There's Montauk Point and Orient Point at the end, and they stick out into the ocean. So the beautiful part about Long Island, the east end of Long Island, it's actually an oceanic environment, and you get incredible seabirds and ducks and all kinds of mergansers, grebes, loons. So it was exciting. In fact, we had a house on Peconic Bay, which is the bay in between the two flukes on the end of Long Island. Mm-hmm. And in the season, we had to be in the winter because you couldn't afford to live there in the summertime. Mm-hmm. So we were always in the winter that otherwise we lived on campus. We had a little cottage right on the bay, and I'd get up in the morning and go, and there would be a sea of ducks out there. Wow. And if you had your binoculars, you see it wasn't just one kind of duck. Yeah. They were what we called old squaw ducks, scoters. I'm trying to remember now what all these different seabirds were that we'd see. And these are, birds that are more pelagic. They're usually off the coast.
But none of them were seagulls, right?
None of them are seagulls. There's no such thing as a seagull. This is important to remember. There are ring-billed gulls, there are laughing gulls, there are herring gulls. Each gull has its own unique, there's glaucous gulls, but there are no such thing as seagulls. I knew a guy named Ralph Seagull one time, but that's as close as we can get.
So Ralph Seagull's the only seagull we know we went to. And
that's right.
He's not a bird.
So, but I use the word myself, there's a seagull.
I didn't know that till now. Somehow I've been able to get through my life without knowing that.
And I was just trying to think, I felt like there was another story that I had.
Well, how about this? Tell me a story about the ocean or the sea and birds.
Okay. Of course, I was in the Coast Guard, and it was in the Pacific Ocean. My ship was home ported in Honolulu, and we used to do ocean station weather patrols. In other words, we'd go out to the middle of the Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and Japan, and stand on station there. We had weather department personnel on board, and we would work with them. Mm-hmm. We put up balloons and track them on radar, stuff like that. And then, but while we were there, you get to see what's going on out in the middle of the ocean. And so, of course, you always had albatrosses, and there were many kinds of. In those days, I knew there was such thing as a lace-on albatross, but it was like all albatrosses, like seagulls, mm-hmm. They're albatrosses. But then I remember it'd get stormy. We had some rough weather, and one time this bird flew right into the radar compartment where we were. Turned out it was a petrel. How appropriate. It was a storm petrel.
That's great.
We figured that out. But we'd always stop at Midway Island on mm-hmm. the way out to Ocean Station. And we'd get there. I've been there many times because we'd go at least twice a year on this patrol during albatross mating season. And here are the albatrosses all over the place. And even, they have, residential communities it's all surface people. There's no it's, it's people mm-hmm. in the Air Force or whatever, sure. Navy, I don't know. But they have houses, and they have the sidewalk, and they have, the little planting strip between the sidewalk and the street.
Sure.
And the albatrosses are nesting in this little...
Oh, my.
And they do their mating routine. They stand up and clack their bills against each other, and you got to watch all that stuff while you were there. And famous, I remember seeing a movie one time about albatrosses. They are beautiful in the air. They can fly forever. They land and fly beautifully from the water, but when it comes time to landing, what I just made the noise, that was an albatross landing. Yeah. And they come in and they don't know how to stop. They stick their legs out and they start rolling and
oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, it's a crash landing every time. Yeah. They just don't know how to take.
So they can land on the water, but
they're great on the water. Yeah. And then taking off from the land is also an issue. I mean, when you're in the water, you kind of just spread your wings and you lift yourself out of the water, but on land you got to start running.
Yeah.
Anyway. So and the other thing I remember we took we were on our way out to sea, and we had some Interior Department personnel, and they were interested in the birds of Laysan Island. I mentioned Laysan albatrosses before because they use Laysan Island as on one of their nesting areas. That's where they were identified. But there's a flightless duck that lives on Laysan Island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. It's on part of the Hawaiian archipelago, and these guys, Interior Department personnel, went out, and I don't know what they were doing exactly, but they collected. And I can remember, here's my Laysan duck. He's in a little box, and he's on the deck of the ship, and I'm looking at him, saying, "Wow, that's a rare duck." So,
people say that about me all the time. But
that's. I'm trying to think of. In my last podcast, we talked about this porpoise. I saw a megapod of porpoises in the Pacific too, but that's another story.
All right.
You got to listen to that podcast.
Okay, that's an advertisement.
So there's my ocean stories.
All right. So so they're flightless. So that are they just? Well, are they good swimmers?
No. Well, I looked it up, and Laysan Island is like 350 acres, and that's it. And they live there. They don't go anywhere else. I guess they can swim, but they don't paddle like across the ocean.
You think the evolutionary process would allow them to use those wings and fly somewhere?
Well, how about ostriches, cassowaries, emus? There are lots of birds that don't fly.
Cassowaries, they have huge eggs. I love them. You can carve them. I actually had a cassowary egg one time.
Wow. Yeah, got to see one in Australia.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, we were in a I want to say resort, an eco resort.
Sure.
A little cabin in the woods and a boardwalk to get out there. And in Australia, they have cassowary signs with cassowary crossing, like we have deer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And but looking out the window one day, and here goes the cassowary walking right by.
Oh, that's great.
So that was another good sighting from Australia. We were out specifically looking for birds. We had a guide again out on the water, and we're cruising along, and we saw this Papuan goatsucker. All right, so what's a goatsucker?
My imagination goes someplace, but I hope it's not there.
All right, a whippoorwill. And Chuck Will's widow is a goatsucker. And it's just an old folklore about these birds taking either blood or milk from particularly goats, but could be any kind of livestock.
Sure. When I go to Africa a lot, and particularly in Tanzania and Kenya, but mainly Tanzania. And
you should see some great birds there.
I do. And I can show you some pictures of some of them because I like taking pictures. They're always laughing at me because there are all these animals around. I'm taking pictures of birds. But on the back of rhinos, they have birds that just
cattle egrets,
and they what they're doing is eating insects, which is a blessing to the rhinos.
Absolutely, and they're here too.
Oh,
they have
we don't have any rhinos here.
But we have there's cattle egrets. They they get on. They'll get on a cow, and they have you seen them, Adrian?
I have not seen them.
I used to see them. See, this is another part of the picture.
Okay.
Back years ago, back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the birds were dripping out of the trees.
Yeah.
And of course, we went through the DDT thing when there was a huge decline, especially in ospreys and eagles and pelicans. And
another confession: I was raised on a farm in Peach Ranch, and we used DDT.
Sure. And it was a great blessing for people who were trying to fight malaria. So, but that's another story.
Okay, so I got a question.
Sure.
Okay, and I've been wanting to ask a birder this for a long, long time. There's a bird called a dodo bird. Is that real?
Dodo. It's a dodo. I have never heard it called a dodo bird, but it's a dodo.
It's a dodo.
It's extinct.
Isn't it okay, because I saw one at Oxford. They have one in the museum.
Right.
And
they went extinct, I think, about 400 years ago.
Okay.
So,
see, and you knew this. That's so brilliant. That's great.
Well, what it was? It was the whalers and all those guys are out there, and they would kill anything to have fresh food. And dodo eggs, of course, I'm sure they were eating dodo eggs, and they just killed all the dodos, and they're all gone. So.
Oh man, that's sad.
What happens.
That's sad.
Yeah.
I noticed something that I live not too far away. 83rd Street, so it's about 5-6 miles from here. And I have a condo, so I'm on the 3rd floor, and it's where my office is and that kind of stuff. So I'm working, but I look out every once in a while. And I notice birds migrating through. Does that happen very often? And some of them, the ones I have are that I see them now, because I've been there for, like 14, 15 years now. I see little birds, and I always thought the big ducks migrated.
No. Hummingbirds migrate from here down to South America.
Whoa.
They cross the Gulf of Mexico. They fly across the Gulf of Mexico.
Do they stop and eat?
They gas up before, but they can't stop and eat when they're flying across the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah. They got to go the whole way.
They must look for winds or something.
Well, they just I don't know
because hummingbirds their wings flap so often.
Well, they buzz.
Yeah.
Yeah, like 200 a second. And they can fly backwards. And they have amazing skill at flying. But this brings to mind another thing. There's a place in Louisiana. They're on the coast of the Gulf of Mexico, down there in the bayous.
Sure.
The birds come back across the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
And this is I've never been there, but there's during the migration season, you get down, people go, lots of birders, and probably too many birders go down along at this place in southern Louisiana, right off the Gulf, and the birds just come flying in, and they have to stop. They can't. They've been flying for hundreds of miles
across the
so they
Gulf,
just flop into the trees and and land, and they're exhausted, and you can see all these different species of birds that have flown, that fly back and forth.
Yeah.
All the warblers, all the vireos, thrushes. These birds that just. But the thing is we were talking about the decline of the eagles and the ospreys and the pelicans. Once we stopped using DDT, though, they all came back. In the meantime, there were a whole lot of the birds, from the woodland birds and the prairie birds and all these other birds that have been flying back and forth that were numerous. They have declined now, really, to the extent where I said, we used to go out birding in like 1970, and there'd be birds everywhere. Yeah, and you would have here's one kind of warbler, here's another kind, here's a vireo over here, and now it's harder to find them. There's just not as many. And I haven't seen a redstart probably in 25 years. Redstart is another warbler. They're the blackbird with red markings, orange or red markings.
Wow.
But I used to see them all the time back, 50 years ago. But now they're very, at least in my my memory, they're very rare. And
what's your favorite bird?
My favorite bird? Oh, I would go for. I'm on the verge of saying a grebe. I remember we went on a retreat one time, a religious retreat, and one of the things we did on the retreat was we picked our totem.
Okay.
And so everybody picked an animal or a bird or something to be their totem. So I picked a grebe, because the grebe goes underwater, on the water, and in the air.
Oh wow!
The loons do that too, and I'm trying to think of other. There are other birds that do that, but just appealing to me that they could fly, swim.
Yeah. Adrian might have a question for you.
I was curious about the grebes. I had a question a while back about the naval, when you were in was it Coast Guard or
Coast
Naval?
Guard, right.
You were talking about the birds that fly for a long time.
The albatrosses.
Albatrosses. I wondered if you'd ever seen any of the frigate birds.
Yes. Oh no, not in the Pacific, but in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean. Yeah, they're pretty common, at least in my experience. Once, these birds, frigate birds, they're called frigate birds because they're pirates. They make their living stealing food from other birds, and you know, other seabirds, because they're all out there in the sea, and they kind of just they're big. They have wide wingspans. They're like albatrosses in that they don't flap a lot. They just kind of glide and soar and look for somebody they can jump and steal a meal from. You know, but that's their niche. You know, and eagles do that too. By the way, eagles.
Oh, they steal.
Yeah, yeah, and that's, you know, Ben Franklin. Yeah. He didn't want.
I don't remember him, you know, as a friend.
Well, Ben Franklin was outraged that people wanted to have the bald eagle as a symbol of the United States. He wanted the turkey, but he said that, you know, these bald eagles are pirates. They can't be trusted. They're, you know. They eat garbage, not garbage, but carrion, because they do. They eat whatever they can get, you know. But I watched one right by we had a little house on the creek, and he just took this food right away from an osprey, you know. And the poor osprey's chugging along with this fish, and gets attacked by an eagle, and they're struggling in the air. Finally, he drops the fish. The eagle scoops it up, and osprey turns around, goes back out to sea.
We've got a tree not too far away from where I live. And actually, it's in the next block, and it's real high. So there's a great shot for it, and I took pictures of it. And the osprey come and sit there in that tree, and then with a fish, and then they'll eat the fish.
Right.
And I guess they have their favorite spots where they do that. They don't do it all. It's not something I see every day, but I have seen it 2 or 3 times where they've been there and they've been eating. It's amazing.
They probably have. This is a nice steady place where I can bring a nice fish.
And not be bothered.
Right, exactly. That's exactly.
Now, what are the biggest birds we have in the United States?
In the United States, the biggest birds? Well, of course, the condor is one, you know. And, you know, those they're just bringing those back. They're trying to get them established again. I don't know how successful that's been. I think they've been pretty successful with it. You know, I think they had to bring them in and breed them for a while and then let them go again. There was a program to do that. And, of course, you know, and I'm trying to think of what else.
We have trumpeter swan, the whooping crane.
Okay, right. The cranes.
Pelican.
You know, in Africa, they have birds that are 6 feet tall. I mean, it's huge. And
we call them ostriches.
Maybe.
Yeah.
No, they're not ostriches, and they're not that other bird that you said. The
emus.
The big eggs that you were talking about.
The cassowaries.
Yeah, the cassowary. No, these are just big birds with long bills.
I'm trying
I'll bring them.
I know.
I'll bring some pictures in.
I'm trying to remember the name of the bird with the big bill. Well, storks.
There are probably a variety of
storks.
Of
Have a very big bill,
but
and they're very
tall
big.
too.
Yep, they are.
Yeah, it's amazing.
The cranes are pretty tall. You know, you got cranes, and they migrate back and forth. You know, between Africa and Europe, and you know, have this whole thing about. Oh, well, it's cranes and storks. I'm thinking storks would, you know, build their nest on chimneys and stuff. But then they fly back to Africa, or wherever their migration area is.
Do you have a list of places that you want a bird?
Yes.
Go birding.
I have to tell you a story along this line. We belong to a church in Alexandria, Emmanuel Church on the Hill, it was called. We were building a new organ, you know, because the old organ had just really gone. So we were trying to buy a new organ, which just costs a lot of money. So you have to have a big drive, and so we had. And I hate to ask people for money. I was on the committee, so I was the one who did the bake sales. Nevertheless, we had this idea. They have this program. A lot of people do this thing called a Big Bird Day, where everybody goes out for one day and say, how many different species of birds can you find in one day? Yeah. So we went to the congregation. We got up in front during church, you know, and said, okay, we're going to have a Big Bird Day. Several of us are going to go out. Like, it's good to go out with several people. More eyes sees more birds. You know? So we're going to have several people, and we're going to go out. And what we want you to do is pledge something, a quarter, $1, something for every species that we find.
Sure.
How many species do you think we're going to find? And you figure out, what's a safe amount of money for you to give. Sure. And people signed up. We were excited about it, And so then we picked a day to go, and we had one guy who was a better birder than the rest of us, who would be able to identify more quickly than we could what birds we were looking at. And we went to a place called Huntley Meadows. Have you ever heard of Huntley Meadows? Huntley Meadows is in Fairfax County.
Okay.
It's and it's a wetland that's used to be an oxbow of the Potomac River, a meander that became cut off from the river and is a wetland. Uh-huh. And it's a birder's paradise. I mean, you go in there, and it's just amazing the number and variety of birds that you can see there. And so that's where we started out. And it was really close to the church too, and it's kind of was in our community. So we went there first, and we started out, and we started through this place, and in the morning we had 40 species of birds. Wow. There were herons. Great blue herons, night herons. There were night herons like to hunt at night, but sometimes they'll be there in the daytime too. But then there were indigo buntings. I'm just trying to remember. It was a long time ago, so it's hard to remember exactly. But several species. We saw red-headed woodpeckers there. The red-headed woodpecker that has the full red head. Yes. I hadn't seen those in a long time, and it was really exciting to get to see them there.
I've seen them twice here.
Yeah, and we saw a great blue had caught a frog. Uh-huh. And he was trying to eat the frog, but the frog wasn't having anything to do. And it was fun because it was funny until it wasn't funny.
It wasn't fun for the frog.
The frog had spread his arms and legs out as far as he could, to make himself as big as he could, so that the heron couldn't swallow him.
Sure.
But then the heron threw him on the ground and chopped him up, and so it was sad in that respect. I was rooting for the frog. Anyway, and I remember we watched indigo bunting nest. I had a spotting scope that we could put on the and get a close up of the birds, and it was just a wonderful. But then with 40 species, now you've pledged a quarter. Mm-hmm. Now you're up to $10 already, right? Sure. And so we went out.
I didn't pledge $1.
Well, then we went to Great Falls, which is where the Potomac River crosses the fall line. It's the fall line, and we started going, and we found all kinds of birds up there. Birds different from the ones we were seeing in Huntley Meadows. So we had more birds. And I think we ended up with 70 species of birds. Wow. And we had planned to go to the beach to see shorebirds and seagulls. And we said, we can't do that, because if we come back with too many birds, they're going to kill us. So we ended up with 70 species in one day, which is a good haul.
It is.
And I think we pulled in like $2,000.
Oh, that's great.
It was just for one day, and it was fun.
And that would be enough for maybe one pipe for the organ.
Well, anyway, the whole idea is that you do this one fun thing, and you make $2,000 for the program.
It's a great deal.
It's just terrific ideas.
You bring up something very interesting now, because you talk about geography, and geography is important, I think, to where. And the one thing I know is that Costa Rica is an important place, because everything from South America migrates up towards North America, but it somewhere around Costa Rica stops. So they have a lot of fauna and flowers and birds and stuff that are indigenous to South Africa, but they're also where does it stop? Well, it gets kind of narrow there, and eventually it stops somewhere around Costa Rica. But they also have all the North American birds and animals and all that sort of stuff. So it gets the best of both. Is that true also with birds, you think?
I know that birds from the northern hemisphere go all the way down, like the Arctic terns.
Sure.
They fly from from Canada, northern Canada, all the way down, the whole way
To the
down
Arctic.
to the end of the down to southern South America.
Yeah.
And then they fly back to breed.
Wow. Yeah.
So, I'm there. You know, the thing is, I think that there isn't. Think about the world, and the world is. Most of the land is in the northern hemisphere, and if you look at the southern hemisphere, it's skinny things, and lots of ocean. Okay. So I think really the migrations mostly come from where the birds go to where the land is, and the trees and the grass, wherever it is, or the tundra, wherever it is that they reproduce, and then in the winter they go to where it's warm. I haven't heard about but it's interesting. I'm just wondering if there is some kind of migration that goes the other way. There's another bird, the sanderling.
Oh yeah.
You know the little sanderlings you see
Sure.
them? They're running around the beach. Those guys come down from the north in Canada, where they also reproduce, and they come down the coast of the East Coast, and then all around down to South America, and then come all the way up the West Coast and go back again.
Really?
They're just on the move constantly. They're just an amazing species that just keeps moving. Yeah. And it just circulating, and these migrations can be an amazing thing.
Sure. Have any birds more recently died out?
I'm not sure about. Do you know of any?
I don't know of any. Actually, I'd have to Google it, but I remember reading recently there were a couple of birds that they thought had died out that they kind of discovered.
I know that there are some that are endangered, that are just maybe a few hundred birds left, but I can't remember exactly which ones they are.
Yeah. It would just seem like with all the changes that we've had in the way that we live and our communities, and
you just nailed it. That's what I was talking about earlier about the DDT and how there was this great recovery for the eagles and the ospreys, but now with the birds that had been abundant then are failing, are declining.
Sure.
And the reason is we're doing all this development. I mean, development is not by its nature bad, but
we take their land.
We take the trees down, we take the prairies away, all the natural areas that the birds need, and just like the butterflies, the same thing. Cut down all the milkweed and what have you, and the habitat is being destroyed, so there's no place for them to go.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of that going on. The habitat destruction. And it's sad for me because one of the things that when my life as an urban planner was to try and preserve land for wildlife and for species, and it's just been a disappointment that it hasn't been better than it could have been.
I always worry about urban planning. I remember I was years ago, before I went on for my PhD, I was a minister, and I lived in a community where it was all planned in California, but they never planned for any churches. And so
that's weird.
We ended up having church in a school, and because they weren't there on Sunday, and we could be. And it just seemed to me like I didn't trust urban planners a whole lot.
Well, there are there's two ways of looking at it. I mean, first of all, is that there are developers who are just out to make a buck, but I knew a lot of guys who were very committed to communities and to nature. And this is in my work with the Urban Land Institute. These people that came there were very committed to really positive, didn't want to just make money, although that was important. They wanted to also have success as a community, and to be able to brag about, gee, I did this, and look, I improved the habitat in this area, or I preserved the habitat. So, there should be more of that, and it's not as if it's too late already.
But we keep taking more and more of their land, and we, as you were talking about earlier, polluted the water and that kind of stuff. You know, I didn't think of this when I moved into where I'm living, but my back window where my desk is looks out to, because my backyard is First Landing State Park. Well, State Park is hundreds of acres of places where birds can fly and little animals can run around too and all that stuff, which, you know, is always a challenge because you want to keep the little animals out. But I love seeing the birds. But here's a myth. The myth was I thought just big birds were the only ones that migrated. And, of course, you broke that. And I guess I just forgot that hummingbirds, but all kinds of little birds that are bigger, like sparrows, they migrate. And that's just amazing to me. And I'm reminded by them because I'm sitting up there and a little bird. Hey, there's another one. Hey, there's a dozen of them out there. And I go, and then they're gone. You know, 2 weeks later, I take them for granted, they're gone. And then another year or two later, I see them again. And
you should see them coming and going.
Yeah.
Then the fall, they go, and in the spring they come back. And in the
how
spring,
do those little things, how they do that?
Well, they just do it. And how about those butterflies?
Yeah, that's amazing to me.
Yeah, the same
was
thing.
Was it the monarch or something?
Yeah, the monarch butterflies.
Now, you bring up a point that I think I didn't expect when talking about birds that we'd bring up, and that is about the ecology and wetlands and that sort of thing. In our area, we're having an argument right now in our community about some wetlands that they want to tear down. And I think for, quote, development, I don't want to take sides on this. I don't know enough about it to do that, but I just bring up the idea that issue that you're talking about is going on right now.
Mm-hmm. And it's been going on for years and years and years. Yeah. I mean, I used to have a bumper sticker on my car that says "Save our wetlands," and with a big mallard duck taking off. You know, me and my wife, we were dedicated to that. When we were in college, we were working. We were the people who did Earth Day, the first Earth Day at our college in 1970. I mean, we were there, and we started the whole thing off at our college.
Wow.
And wetlands were always a major thing, and a lot of people just don't understand how important they are.
Well, Adrian, I appreciate you sitting in with us. Any final questions you have?
Well, I had a couple.
Or any stories?
I probably have stories too. But
good, let's hear a story.
One of my favorite birding experiences was over here at Pleasure House Point, the kind of pocket wilderness nature preserve they have there. It was the first time I ever got to see an osprey building a nest. Wow. I was out there, and I just see this osprey go by with a stick, and then like 3 minutes later, see the same one go by with another stick, right? And it was like just magical to me when I realized what was happening, and I was able to notate the place where I saw it and share it with local people who keep track of these things, the nests and stuff. And that was like the coolest experience within the last 5 years. But I did have a couple of questions for it, and maybe you covered this in the beginning, so we can cut this out.
No, go ahead.
If you were talking to someone who was getting into birding, what advice would you give them?
I really do have advice. I have it right here. I have it written down. And I'll tell you, it depends on if they're Westminster-Canterbury residents, it's an issue. Because I recommend the bird feeder right off the bat. If you want to get started, get a bird feeder, put the bird food out there, and take time to watch. Don't just put it up and see birds fly by. Sit down and watch, because you'll see more than just the common birds. You'll see maybe 3 or 4 species of woodpeckers that'll come to your feeder. Put out suet, because that's what they like. You have to put out the right food. Then you got to get binoculars. I mean, if you don't have binoculars, you can't really see into the trees and see the birds. And then you got to get out into nature. And you have to learn how to use the binoculars, and get comfortable with them. That's why the bird feeder is so good. It's because you can see the birds, you can move around and see the ones that come from the trees to where you are. And then the next thing that happens, I hate to say I enjoy this, But we put, you put a bird feeder out, you have the mourning doves, and you have all these different, mourning doves are hogging the feeder, and all of a sudden here comes this hawk, bam, and there goes a mourning dove. But it's a bird feeder, and you're feeding the birds. So I think that's perfectly, I love it.
Well, I have to tell you, when you decide to set out a bird feeder, know that you're not just feeding the birds, you're feeding the squirrels.
Right.
And even if you get one of these fancy bird feeders that doesn't allow a squirrel to get in, they will try, and they will never give up. They're the most tenacious animal I know, and they'll swing back and forth, and they'll knock it down, and then they'll run down, and the rats can't do that. The squirrels are the clowns of the animal family.
Yeah, I know.
And then the problem is, and I had a bird feeder, and I absolutely loved it. And getting up in the morning was so wonderful because my bird feeder's sitting right outside my window in my second floor where my kitchen is, and I'm eating, and my daughter-in-law and my son who live with me. They were watching, and we just loved getting up and watching what kind of birds you see today and seeing different ones at different times coming out. But and the squirrels come in. I didn't really like that, but they're fun. They're just so funny because they do all these crazy things. Then the rats came, and when the rats came, it all went down. I don't want any rats around my house. So.
Well, I have one more thing to say though about. I hope I can remember what I'm going to say now. But, we were talking about binoculars and getting out into nature. I mean, it's really important. And it's good to go with friends, first of all, because it's a nice social thing to do, plus more eyes. When, go to First Landing Park and watch for movement in the trees, get the binoculars up there and see what you can learn, So, I don't know. I have some other thing I was thinking of, and I can't remember what it is.
While you're thinking of it, just let me say this. It's the Pleasure House Point Wetlands Restoration Project. And there's a lot of controversy because they're thinking about not allowing that to go on, apparently. I could have this wrong, so I don't want to.
Well,
but I know that there's controversy over that. I just Googled wetlands controversy in Virginia Beach, and it came up, and I remember seeing this on the neighborhood discussion about the Pleasure House Point. And you were just talking about Pleasure House, where you saw something. You might look at that if you're interested. I'm not telling you what side to get on. I'm just telling you because maybe there's a good reason. I don't know.
Yeah, the other thing I was thinking of is you were talking about the ospreys building a nest. I mean, they're building a nest. They're not just blocking things. They're placing the sticks, and you look at some of these birds, the nests they build, orioles, they build a sock, that hangs down.
That's right.
And the weaver birds, that they're not local. I mean, I guess they're in Africa more, but still they weave a nest, and how this stuff, you talk about evolution. These birds have learned or over eons how to do this thing. They've, it's just incredible to me that they, just with the beak, they don't have hands.
Right.
Yeah.
My neighbor, they have left now that somebody else moved in, but she put up 5 or 6 houses, owl houses, and owls really go in there. I don't, but so do other birds apparently, and animals too. She was doing that for a while, and then we opened up one of our doors one evening. This was in the transition season. It was either fall or spring. I can't remember which. And next thing I knew is this big commotion. I went into my living room above my fireplace, didn't have a fire in there, and there was an owl inside my house.
What kind of an owl, do you know?
I got a picture of it.
Was it big or little?
It was little.
Little, yeah, probably like a screech owl or maybe a saw-whet, a little tiny guy like this?
Yeah, I'll show you a picture. I don't know my owls, but then we didn't know how to get him out, and we didn't want him to hurt himself,
That's the problem.
And so we dinked around there for a long time trying to figure it. Finally, my son, he saw me trying. He just went in, he grabbed something and put it over its head, and then take it out and let it fly. They're beautiful animals.
I know.
Owls are beautiful. But
We didn't talk about owls, but owls are great. Yeah.
No, we should though. Another lecture, another podcast on owls.
We can do owls.
Yeah, and we'll get Adrian to join us. We've got to get a couple stories on owls. All right. Anything else you want to say?
No, I think I'm set out.
All right. Adrian, do you want to add anything more?
The only other thing we could do a callback. We were talking about Benjamin Franklin and the turkey and the American eagle, the American bald eagle.
Right.
Mm-hmm. It was not the official bird of the U.S. until December 24th, 2024. It was signed into law. The American bald eagle finally became the national bird.
Wow.
Just last year, within the last month.
That.
Wait, you said 2024.
Right.
Wow, that would be last year.
They've been on, all kinds of on bills, money and stuff.
It was just never made official until last month.
I did not
President's
know
crest.
that. This is amazing. You learn so many new things on these podcasts.
Fascinating.
I want to thank you, Mike, for being with you. Adrian, for joining us. It was a delight. And Roy, as always. Anyway, thank you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Westminster-Canterbury Tales podcast. Thank you for listening.